Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe it was the scar, or the way she didn't fill the silence with small talk, like the others did. Maybe it was because she looked more like a civilian than a soldier, thin, quiet, with eyes that never quite stopped moving. But that didn't matter to Sergeant Eva Rostova. The dust of forward operating base Kestrel clung to her uniform like it wanted her gone. It was fine, red, and metallic, a reminder that even the air here was hostile, the kind of dust that worked its way into every moving part, into every bite of food, into the skin itself. When she stepped off the Tiltrotor Osprey, the twin rotors kicked up a storm that turned the world to chaos. The sky became a swirling ochre blur. Soldiers ducked their heads, cursing. Eva didn't. She just cinched her collar tighter and walked through the haze. From a distance, she didn't look like much, lean, mid-30s, not tall. Her face was all sharp edges and straight lines, a face built for endurance rather than charm. A thin, silvery scar cut from her left eye to her jawline, pulling her mouth into a slight, permanent frown. It wasn't a wound she hid. It was one she carried. The base itself looked half alive. Barbed wire fluttered with shredded flags. Antennas leaned like tired sentinels. The mountains rose around it like jagged teeth, beautiful if you weren't the one bleeding in them. A cluster of infantrymen lounged near a stack of sandbags, their rifles slung low. Their eyes tracked her as she approached, curiosity fatting into dismissal the moment they saw the insignia on her sleeve. Quartermaster Corps. A supply clerk. Not a warrior. Not one of them. Their lieutenant, young, immaculate, with the arrogance of fresh academy polish, stepped forward. "Sergeant Rostova," he said, his tone balanced between politeness and ridicule. "You're the new bean counter, right?" "Lieutenant," she replied, handing him a data pad. "My orders. I'm here to conduct a full logistical audit of your depot. Supply chains, munitions control, storage integrity." He gave the pad a lazy glance, then passed it to the mountain of a man beside him, Sergeant Gallinus, known by his call sign Wrecker. His arms were heavy with inked scars of old battles, the kind of man who thought respect had to be earned through blood. "Streamline, huh?" Gallinus smirked. "Right, because what this place really needs is another pencil pusher telling us how to stack our ammo." Laughter rippled through the group, the kind of laughter that's meant to exclude. Eva didn't react. Her dark eyes met his calm, unflinching, studying, the kind of look that doesn't challenge but dissects. "My job," she said quietly, "is to make sure you have what you need when the shooting starts, and to find vulnerabilities before the enemy does." "Vulnerabilities," Lieutenant Vance scoffed. "This is the 75th Ranger Regiment, Sergeant. We don't have vulnerabilities." He turned his back on her, waving toward a row of prefab buildings. "The depot, over there. Colonel Thorne wants you at the morning brief in 30. Try not to get in the way." The men's laughter carried on the wind as they walked off. Only one, a corporal named Diaz, looked back, just a flicker of guilt before he followed the others. They called her weak. They called her plain. They called her things she'd stopped hearing years ago. To them, she was invisible. But to her, they were an open book. As she walked through the camp, her eyes caught details. The exposed fuel lines near the motor pool, the med bay placed too close to the western perimeter, the single communication tower standing like a beacon for enemy snipers. Every soldier she passed saw a clipboard in her hand. What they didn't see was the way she cataloged the base like a predator, studying a wounded animal. She adjusted her pack, not heavy but dense with tools, data drives, a sidearm, familiar weight. She didn't need their welcome or their trust. She needed their base to survive the week. The wind carried the scent of diesel and dust and something else, something coming. The command tent smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. A flickering holographic map painted everyone in ghostly blue light. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the table, square-jawed, salt-haired, and carved from battlefield tradition. A man who believed wars were won by grit and steel, not spreadsheets. He barely acknowledged Eva. "Sergeant, welcome to Kestrel. Find your corner. This is a tactical briefing." She nodded, standing silently along the edge, unseen and unheard. The intel officer droned on about enemy movement, intercepted chatter, weapon caches in the hills. Then Vance took over, the same lieutenant from before, swagger in his voice, ambition in his tone. "Our patrols will stay aggressive," he said. "We hit them before they hit us, keep the pressure up. They won't dare an assault." Colonel Thorne nodded approvingly. "Proactive, that's what I like." He glanced at Eva almost as an afterthought. "Quartermaster, anything to report?" The question wasn't an invitation, it was a courtesy. She stepped forward anyway. "Yes, sir," she said calmly. "Several urgent concerns." The room's atmosphere shifted: curiosity, skepticism, faint annoyance. "The primary ammunition depot," she began, "is beside the vehicle motor pool. A single hit mortar, RPG, would ignite the transport fuel and detonate our reserve. One attack could erase both logistics and mobility." The lieutenant's smirk faltered. "I recommend dispersing at least 60% of munitions into secondary caches, effective immediately." Colonel Thorne frowned. "The depot's where it is for efficiency, Sergeant. My men rearm fast. I won't send them scavenging mid-fight." "Speed doesn't matter," Eva replied, "if the supplies are gone." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Before he could interrupt, she continued. "The comms tower on Ridgeback Point relies on a single generator. No hardened backup. The fuel line's exposed. If we lose that tower, we lose long-range contact." Vance interjected, "We have satellite phones." "Which can be jammed," she countered, her eyes never leaving Thorne. "Especially if the enemy knows we're isolated." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She pressed on. "And your medical tent," she said, "is on the western perimeter, the most likely axis of assault. If this base is ever hit, the first casualties will be our medics." Silence. The kind that doesn't come from agreement, but from offense. Then Gallinus laughed. "Sounds like she wants us to dig in and hide. What's next, Sergeant? You gonna tell us where to breathe?" Thorne's voice hardened. "Sergeant Rostova, I appreciate your thoroughness, but you are not a tactical officer. You're here to count inventory, not teach my men how to fight." His tone carried finality, the kind that kills careers. "You've made your report. It's noted and filed. Now let the professionals do their jobs." Eva nodded once. "Yes, sir." She turned and left without another word. Outside, the air was colder. The wind whistled through the razor wire, a high, lonely sound. She sat on a crate and opened her datapad. She didn't delete the report. Instead, she opened a new file, a private one. She began mapping hidden points across the base, forgotten bunkers, sealed tunnels, unregistered storage spaces buried in old construction records, places no one else knew existed. While they planned a war around what they thought they had, she was preparing for what they had forgotten. That night, Kestrel slept under a cold moon. But Eva didn't sleep. She moved through the depot, marking crates with quiet precision, checking generator feeds, tracing cables by hand, walking the perimeter alone. Somewhere beyond those mountains, she could feel it, the presence of something watching, waiting. She'd seen it before in other postings, other wars, the stillness before a storm. Inside her chest, her heart didn't race. It never did. But she could feel a pressure building, a sense that something was about to test this place and everyone in it. And she knew what would happen. Because it always happened. They wouldn't listen until it was too late. When dawn broke, the base looked the same. But it was. A faint hum came from the generator compound, the same one she'd warned about. The comms tower stood tall, proud, and exposed against the skyline. The med bay still lay vulnerable on the west wall. The soldiers were laughing over breakfast. Gallinus was telling a joke about the pretty quartermaster who wanted to move their ammo. Vance smirked. Even Thorne smiled. Eva passed by without comment, carrying a clipboard. They didn't see the quiet contempt in her eyes. Not hatred, disappointment. She'd seen men like this before, brave, skilled, but blind in the ways that mattered. They mistook calm for weakness, and silence for submission. But Ristova had learned something long ago. The quiet ones often carried the loudest truths. She paused near the perimeter wall, running her hand along the sandbags. The sun rose over the mountains like a blade of light, slicing the landscape in half. She closed her eyes. Somewhere in the valley below, in that silent expanse of shadow, something stirred. There was a sound. Faint, too rhythmic to be wind, too deliberate to be harmless. A single distant thump rolled through the air, almost like a heartbeat. Eva's eyes snapped open. She looked toward the ridge. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was a mortar tube. And just like that, the quiet became over. The first mortar didn't whistle. It screamed. A hollow, metallic shriek that cut through the thin mountain air, and then the world turned white. The shell hit the communications tower dead on, ripping the night apart. The explosion rolled through the base like thunder, knocking men off their feet, shattering windows, plunging everything into darkness. For a single, surreal moment, there was silence, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Then the sky erupted. Tracer rounds stitched red across the darkness. Mortars began to fall in perfect rhythm, walking toward the western perimeter, the same side Eva had warned about, the same side where the medics slept. It wasn't a probing attack. It was annihilation, deliberate, precise, surgical. Inside the command tent, chaos exploded with the same ferocity as the shells. Radios hissed with static. Men shouted into dead channels. The holographic map flickered, then died completely as the backup power kicked in. Lieutenant Vance's voice was sharp, panicked, desperate. "They're jamming us full spectrum. We've lost Ridgeback Point." Colonel Thorne's silhouette loomed in the dim red emergency lighting. "Get your squads to the perimeter. Wrecker, west wall now, move." Outside, the base howled with alarms, claxons overlapping with gunfire. Soldiers scrambled, boots hammering against gravel. The confident posture of elite warfighters was gone, replaced by the raw, animal movement of men trying to survive. And in the middle of it all, Sergeant Eva Ristova moved through the storm like she'd been waiting for it. While others ducked for cover, she walked, calm, deliberate, her face illuminated by flashes of red and orange. She wasn't carrying a rifle, just her datapad and a purpose. She found Sergeant Patterson, the old mess chief, huddled behind an overturned cart with two terrified young cooks. They were trembling, eyes wide, trapped between instinct and paralysis. "Patterson," she barked, the sound of her voice cut through the chaos. "On your feet." He blinked at her. "Ma'am, we're cooks." "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight you're logistics. Grab that pry bar, follow me." They didn't argue. Something in her tone, or maybe in her stillness, told them it wasn't a request. Eva led them through the smoke and shrapnel toward the remains of an old building marked for demolition. They ducked inside as another mortar hit nearby, the floor trembling under their boots. "This way," she pointed at a section of cracked concrete. "Start prying." They hesitated, but her expression didn't allow hesitation. They began to dig. The sound of metal scraping stone echoed through the ruin. Dust filled their lungs. Then a hollow clang. They'd found steel. Together they heaved a hidden hatch open. Below, a darkness breathed out the stale scent of forgotten years. Eva dropped to one knee, shining a light inside. Rows of crates gleamed under a coat of dust. Ammunition. Cases of it 5.56, 7.62, even 40 grenades. Enough to arm a platoon. 3 rotations ago, a co hid this stash, she said quietly. Falsified records. I found the discrepancy last night. She turned to Patterson. You know the storm drains under the mess hall. He nodded, dazed. Yeah. They run parallel to the west wall. Use them. Move these crates through, stay low, no noise, no light. He swallowed hard, then nodded again. She squeezed his shoulder, the only gesture of reassurance she ever gave. Go, now. Outside, the night burned. Eva moved like a ghost through the chaos. The air was thick with cordite and burning fuel. Men shouted for ammo that wasn't coming. Radios crackled with broken calls. Every one of them carried panic, the same panic she'd predicted and prepared for. She found 2 mechanics crouched near the burning wreck of a Humvee, trying to salvage something from the flames. You, she called out, drop that. There's a container behind the old infirmary, marked as contaminated waste. They stared at her bewildered. Ma'am, that's restricted. It's mislabeled. Get bolt cutters. Inside you'll find field surgical kits, blood units, morphine, all real, all usable. A supply sergeant hid the error years ago. She pointed toward the hardened bunker near the base's center. Triage there. No one dies waiting for help. The mechanics hesitated only a second more before running. Inside the command tent, the storm was collapsing. The explosion at the motor pool lit the horizon like a false sunrise. Then came the sound that every soldier fears, a secondary detonation. The ammunition depot. The shockwave slammed through the tent, throwing bodies to the ground, ripping canvas apart. Colonel Thorne cried out as shrapnel tore through his arm. Radios shattered. Men screamed. The map table overturned. The pride of the 75th Ranger Regiment, elite, disciplined, lethal, had become trapped in a coffin of its own arrogance. Thorne, pale and bleeding, barked into a useless radio. Wrecker, report. Through static came Gallinus' voice, strained, furious. West wall's collapsing. They've got MGs in the rocks. We're getting shredded. We need ammo. Negative, came Vance's reply. Depot's gone. Conserve what you have. Conserve, Gallinus shouted. They're coming over the goddamn walls. Eva heard the panic through a half-broken headset discarded in the dirt. Her expression didn't change. She turned and kept moving. While the men fought for control, she was fighting for survival, not through strength, but through structure. Her hands worked faster than her thoughts. Every decision she made was already predicted, pre-planned, prepared. She wasn't saving them out of loyalty. She was saving them because that was her function. The Kikimora, the house spirit, keep the house in order. She moved toward the command area. Thorne was down, his sleeve soaked in blood. Vance was shouting into a dead mic, his voice cracking under pressure. Second squad, advance, suppress that nest. A corporal's voice came back over the comm. Negative, they've got the high ground, sir. We can't get close. Eva appeared at the edge of the chaos, her uniform streaked with dust and smoke. Lieutenant, she said, calm and direct, you're sending them into a kill zone. He turned, eyes wild. Rostova, what the hell are you doing out here? Get down. Her gaze moved past him, scanning the ridgeline, sharp, clinical, calculating. That machine gun nest, she said. They're inside the old survey station. The foundation is unstable on the east face. She looked to a nearby combat engineer, a kid barely 20. You have 2 blocks of C4. He nodded, stunned. Why, yes, ma'am. Place them at the base of that wedge-shaped rock, 50 meters east of the nest. The shockwave will travel through the bedrock and collapse it. Sympathetic detonation. Vance blinked. That's insane. It's physics, she said. Move. The engineer hesitated, then went running low under fire. Eva watched calm. She could see the math in her head, the timing of the fuse, the distance to safety. 30 seconds later, the mountain growled. A low, concussive thud rolled through the valley, then the grinding sound of rock giving way. The enemy nest vanished under a cascade of debris. A single, stunned cheer erupted from the beleaguered squad. The impossible had worked. Vance turned toward her, his arrogance stripped bare, replaced by disbelief. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Then another voice screamed over the comm. "Command, they're at the comms relay. Sappers, they're planting charges. We're out of ammo. Diaz is hit." Gallinus' voice, hoarse and desperate. "The last defense point, the last lifeline." Eva didn't hesitate. She scanned the ground, found a fallen rifle, and picked it up. Her hands moved with a fluency that had nothing to do with logistics. She racked the bolt with a single smooth motion, then dropped to one knee behind a shattered barrier. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse steadied. The battlefield seemed to narrow around her until there was only geometry, distance, wind, light. 200 meters. 3 targets. Night vision burned green halos across her vision. She fired once. The first sapper dropped. A pause. The other two froze, scanning wildly. Second shot. The gunner collapsed forward. The third tried to run. Eva exhaled, slow, precise. Third shot. The man fell face first in the dirt, his detonator clattering away. 3 shots. 3 kills. 200 meters, under fire in the dark, with iron sights. It wasn't just skill. It was memory. Gallinus, crouched behind the relay, looked up, blood on his face, disbelief in his eyes. He saw her, the quiet clerk, the one they'd mocked. And he understood nothing. Nothing except that she had just saved them. The night bled into dawn. The enemy broke. The assault faltered. By the time the first sunlight hit the valley, the mountain slopes were littered with bodies. The surviving rangers moved like ghosts among the wreckage, dragging the wounded, counting the dead. The base had held. Barely. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reprieve. Lieutenant Vance found her near the relay tower she'd defended. She was sitting on the ground, field stripping the M4 with slow, deliberate precision, cleaning, oiling, reassembling. The weapon was spotless, but she cleaned it anyway. It wasn't about maintenance. It was ritual. He stopped a few steps away, speechless. His uniform was torn, face streaked with soot. The swagger was gone. What stood before her wasn't a commander, just a man trying to understand. "That engineer," he said finally, voice hoarse. "He told me what you called it, sympathetic detonation. That's a breacher's term, special forces." She didn't look up. "And those shots," he continued, 3 of them in the dark, that's not something they teach in quartermaster school." Slowly she met his gaze. Her eyes were calm. Unreadable. "Who are you, Sergeant?" he asked quietly. Before she could answer, another voice spoke from behind him. "I think I know," said Colonel Thorne, arm in a bloody sling. His voice carried a weight it hadn't the night before. He held a datapad, cracked but functional. "When the comms came back online, I accessed your full service record." He turned the screen toward Vance. It was mostly blacked out, redacted lines upon lines, but one entry glowed clear. "Graduate," Thorne read aloud, "Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC." He looked up at her, disbelief mingled with respect. "That's the advanced sniper program. Only Rangers and Green Berets get that far." He hesitated, then read the last word. "Call sign Kikimura." The name hung in the air. Gallinus, limping toward them, stopped dead. He knew the word. A Slavic legend, a house spirit that punished the arrogant, the careless. He looked at Eva, his voice trembling. "They say if you don't keep your house in order, the Kikimura comes for you." Eva said nothing. She reassembled the rifle, each metallic click echoing in the morning air. The last one, the receiver locking into place, sounded like judgment. She stood, the weapon hanging loosely in her hand, and looked out over what was left of Kestrel. The house was still standing, and the spirit had done its work. The sky above Fob Kestrel was pale and brittle, like glass stretched too thin. The smoke had cleared, but the air still tasted of metal, a metallic tang of things burned and broken. Every sound was subdued now. The crunch of boots on gravel, the groan of twisted metal cooling in the sun, the quiet murmurs of men who'd forgotten how to speak above a whisper. They had survived the night. Barely. The once proud fortress on the mountain had become a graveyard of half-melted steel and blackened concrete. The motor pool was gone. The ammo depot was gone. The western wall a scar of scorched stone and blood. What remained standing looked more like the skeleton of a base than the heart of one. The Rangers of the 75th moved through the wreckage like ghosts, silent, hollow-eyed, stripped of swagger. Their movements were slow, almost reverent. They weren't celebrating victory, they were counting the cost. And in the middle of that quiet ruin stood Sergeant Eva Rostova, the woman they had mocked, the woman they had dismissed, the woman they had never truly seen. She wasn't resting. She wasn't standing at the command tent or giving orders. She sat on a crate beside the comms relay she had saved, hands steady as she disassembled and cleaned the M4 she'd used in the fight. The motions were smooth, methodical, almost meditative. Each click of metal sounded like punctuation in a language only she understood. Click, bolt carrier removed. Click, chamber cleared. Click, barrel wiped clean. There was a kind of peace in her movements, not joy, not relief, just quiet precision, the kind of peace found in order restored if only temporarily. The rifle was already spotless, but Eva cleaned it anyway. Because cleaning wasn't the point. Control was. Footsteps approached, slow, hesitant. Lieutenant Kalen Vance, the same man who had dismissed her in front of everyone. He stopped a few feet away. His uniform was in tatters, his face streaked with soot, his voice cracked when he spoke. "The engineer," he said softly. "The one you told to set the C4, he said you called it sympathetic detonation." Eva didn't answer. She didn't even glance up. "That's not quartermaster language," he went on. "That's breacher talk, special forces." She paused mid-motion, looked at him not sharply, not accusingly, just looked. Vance hesitated, but the words kept coming, as if dragged out of him. "And those shots last night, 200 meters iron sights under fire," he swallowed hard. "That's not something they teach in supply school." Her gaze stayed steady, impassive. The scar across her cheek caught the early light turning silver-white. "Who are you, Sergeant?" he asked finally. It wasn't a demand anymore. It was a confession, a man admitting he'd been blind. Before she could answer, a rough voice spoke from behind him. "I think I can answer that," said Colonel Thorne. He stepped into the pale light, arm bound in a bloody sling, his face gaunt from pain and exhaustion. But his eyes had changed. The hard pride of command was gone. What replaced it was something quieter, heavier. He held out a cracked datapad. "When the relay came back online," he said, "I accessed your full service record, or what I could of it." He turned the screen toward Vance. It was a wall of redacted lines, names, missions, operations all blacked out, but one small line remained visible at the bottom. "Graduate Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC." Thorne's voice softened. "That's the Army's advanced sniper school, the one reserved for special forces, Green Berets, Rangers." He looked up at her. "Your file lists a call sign too." He hesitated, then spoke the word. "Kikimora." Silence fell over the small group. Even the wind seemed to pause. Gallinus, the towering sergeant who had once called her weak, limped forward, blood still drying on his arm. His voice was low, almost reverent. "I've heard that name before," he murmured. "From an old Chechen fighter. Kikimora, a house spirit from Slavic legend. Quiet, invisible, but if you don't keep your house in order, it punishes you." His eyes met hers. "That's what you are, isn't it? You were sent here to test us, to see if our house was in order." Eva said nothing. She didn't deny it, she didn't confirm it. She simply reassembled the rifle, each metallic snap echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. The last click, the receiver locking into place, sounded final, absolute. She stood slowly, slinging the rifle across her shoulder. Her gaze moved over the base, the twisted remains of Kestrel, the men who now avoided her eyes out of shame more than pride. The arrogance that had filled this place was gone. She had stripped it away quietly, without intention or cruelty. Just necessity. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like what she'd always been, ordinary, scarred, silent. But in the hearts of every man she'd saved, her image had already changed forever. A week later, the air above Kestrel was thick again, this time with the beating rotors of 3 inbound Blackhawks. The wind they brought carried no dust of war, only the heavy, solemn breath of ceremony. Regional Command had come to see what remained of Fob Kestrel. The surviving Rangers stood assembled on the makeshift parade ground, a clearing of gravel hastily swept clean of debris. Their uniforms were patched, their boots scorched, their eyes sunken, but they stood tall because they were still standing at all. At their head, a man stepped off the lead helicopter, General Abramson, 4 stars shining on his chest, his expression carved in oak, the kind of man whose presence alone made the air stand straighter. The ceremony began without music, no fanfare, no polished speeches, just the weight of what had happened here. The general moved down the line. He pinned a silver star on Colonel Thorne's chest for holding command despite his wounds. A bronze star with valor on Lieutenant Vance for leading in chaos. Medals for Gallinus, for Diaz, for the engineers and medics who had held the line when the world fell apart. Each pin struck metal, each handshake brief. But every soldier knew that the real ceremony was still to come, the one no one had rehearsed. Eva stood in the back row among the support staff, the cooks, the mechanics, the comms techs. Her posture was straight, hands clasped behind her back. She wore no medals, no ribbons beyond her regulation set. The sun caught the edge of her scar and made it glow faintly, like a seam of light cut into stone. The general reached the end of the line. For a moment, it seemed the ceremony was over. Thorne turned to give the dismiss order, "Company." But General Abramson didn't turn away. He hesitated. His gaze swept past the decorated officers, past the hardened infantry, scanning the back ranks. Then he saw her. The quiet woman standing behind the support crew, motionless and unassuming. Without a word, he began to walk. The sound of his boots on gravel was deafening in the silence. Each step echoed like judgment through the ranks. He walked past Thorne, past Vance, past Gallinus and the other Rangers, past every man who had medals pinned to his chest. He stopped in front of Eva Ristova. A 4-star general stood before a logistics sergeant. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The general's face was unreadable, equal parts exhaustion and awe. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his brow and rendered a perfect salute. The air froze. Colonel Thorne felt something seize in his chest, pride, humility, guilt all tangled together. His good arm snapped up in salute, 10 Hut. The order cracked through the air like thunder. Every soldier on that parade ground followed. Lieutenant Vance, Sergeant Gallinus, Corporal Diaz, the cooks, the medics, the engineers. Every one of them raised their hand, not to the general, not to the chain of command, but to her. To the woman they had called plain. to the sergeant they had called weak, to the ghost who had saved their lives. Eva didn't move for a long moment. The salute hung between them, heavy as stone. Then, with the same calm precision she had shown since the day she arrived, she raised her own hand. Her palm found her brow in a crisp, silent acknowledgement, a return salute, simple and flawless. No words, no emotion, just quiet dignity. Around her, the mountains held their silence. No birds, no wind. Just the echo of discipline, of respect, of something ancient being restored. The salute lasted several seconds. Then the general dropped his hand, so did she. And the ceremony was over. But everyone who had witnessed it knew that something far more profound had happened on that mountain. Something that wouldn't make it into the reports or the medals or the briefings. The soldiers had seen strength, not loud, not masculine, not boastful. Something quieter. Something unbreakable. That night, when the laughter and relief returned to the mess hall, when the survivors began to drink and tell stories to fill the silence, she wasn't there. Eva sat alone in the half-lit supply depot. The same depot that had nearly burned a week ago. The air was still thick with the scent of oil and metal. Shadows stretched across the stacked crates like long, tired arms. The world outside was loud, but here it was still. She sat on an overturned crate, the same M4 laid across her lap on a piece of canvas. She wasn't cleaning it now. She was just holding it. Her fingers moved absently along its barrel, tracing the grooves like someone remembering an old hymn. The door creaked open behind her. A figure stepped inside, hesitant. Corporal Diaz, the young soldier who had watched her fire those impossible shots. He carried a tin mug of coffee, steam curling upward into the dim light. He didn't speak at first. She didn't look up. He cleared his throat. "Sergeant," he said softly, "I thought you might want some coffee." He set it down gently beside her. No sugar, no cream, just black the way he thought she'd take it. It wasn't a gift, it was a gesture, a quiet apology. A recognition. For a moment, nothing moved. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. The hardness softened, the jaw unclenched. For just a heartbeat, her eyes seemed almost warm. She gave a small, almost invisible nod. That was all. But for Diaz, it was everything. He nodded back and turned to leave. The door shut behind him with a soft metallic click. Eva looked at the steaming mug. Then back at the rifle. She lifted the coffee, took a slow sip, and exhaled. Outside, the base was alive again. Inside, the house spirit watched over it, quiet, watchful, unseen. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world remembers. How do you go back to silence after the world has screamed? Fob Kestrel slept uneasily in the days that followed the salute. The helicopters came and went, dropping off supplies and hauling away the wounded. Reporters wanted statements, command wanted numbers. The living wanted to forget. But silence stayed. It seeped into the cracks of concrete, into the twisted steel of burned-out trucks, into the men who still woke at night to the echo of mortars. Even laughter sounded fragile now, like glass trying not to break. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Sergeant Eva Ristova walked the perimeter alone. The mornings were colder now, the kind of cold that bit without warning. She moved through the mist, boots crunching softly on gravel, her breath a faint ghost before her face. No clipboard this time, no datapad, just her eyes tracing lines of weakness that still existed even after the battle. She checked the new power lines running to the comms tower, now buried deep under sandbags. She paused by the medical bunker, where a field surgeon gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. No words, just a shared understanding that order had been restored and it had cost them everything. When she reached the western wall, she stopped. The section where the medics had died, the section she had warned about. The sandbags there were darker than the rest, stained with blood that no one had scrubbed away yet. She crouched, tracing the edge of the barrier with gloved fingers. In her head, she heard the echo of her own voice from that first briefing. The first mortars that come over that wall will land on our surgeons and our blood supply. She had been right. And being right didn't feel like victory. It felt like guilt. Back at her quarters, a narrow, unheated container stacked between two supply sheds, she opened her footlocker. Inside was a small, worn photograph wrapped in oilcloth. A man and a woman stood in front of a birch forest, smiling. The woman's face was younger, unscarred, her eyes alive. The man's uniform bore a sniper's insignia. She ran her thumb across the man's cheek in the picture. He had been her instructor once, later her husband. He never came back from their last mission. No body, no closure, just a radio silence that stretched into years. Eva placed the photo back into the cloth, folded it carefully, and closed the locker. Some ghosts didn't need to be summoned. They lived beside you quietly. Later that day, Colonel Thorne requested her presence. She entered his office, the remnants of the command tent now replaced by a prefab module with patched holes and a smell of disinfectant. Thorne sat behind a steel desk, his sling gone but the stiffness in his movements still obvious. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of the arrogance she remembered. "Sit down, Sergeant." She did. He studied her for a long time. "I read more of your file," he said finally. "What little wasn't blacked out?" She said nothing. "You were attached to Task 9, weren't you?" he asked quietly. "The ones they sent into Phaedra Pass back in the First War." Her eyes didn't move, but something in her breathing shifted. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly. "They said Task 9 didn't make it out." "They didn't," she replied. Her voice was even, too even. "And you?" "I did." Silence filled the space between them like fog. Thorne leaned back, the weight of command heavy on him. "You could have been anything, Rostova. Instructor, officer, why hide in logistics?" Eva's gaze drifted to the wall, an old mission map still tacked there, the ridges and valleys marked in faded ink. "Because the world doesn't listen to shooters," she said softly. "It listens to clerks, to numbers. If you want to see the truth of a unit, you watch the ones who think no one's watching." Thorne let out a slow breath. "You saved this base." She shook her head. "No, sir. The cooks, the medics, the engineers, they saved it. I just kept the house standing long enough for them to do it." Thorne stared at her for a long moment, then gave a faint smile, the kind that knows it's out of its depth. "Command wants a report. They'll probably want you transferred, maybe promoted." "Don't," she said. He frowned. "Do. Don't transfer me, don't promote me, don't mention me." Her tone was calm but final. "Let the story be yours, that's how this works." Thorne studied her, then nodded. "Understood." As she stood to leave, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner." Eva paused by the door. "You did listen," she said, "just not with your ears." Night fell again over Kestrel. The fires were out now, replaced by generators humming like distant bees. The sky was clear, sharp with stars. Eva sat outside her quarters, rifle across her knees, listening to the soft murmur of voices drifting from the mess hall. Inside, laughter rose and fell like ocean waves, raw, unsteady, healing. Men told stories of the siege, each version a little louder, a little braver. But every story, no matter how exaggerated, ended the same way. With a quiet woman stepping through the smoke and making the impossible happen. She could hear Galenus's deep voice booming through the walls. I swear to God, she didn't even blink. Just 3 shots pop, 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 and those bastards dropped like they were on strings. More laughter, glasses clinking. Eva smiled faintly. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was reverence dressed as humor. Still, she didn't join them. She wasn't made for celebration. Some souls weren't built for noise. They kept their balance in silence. Hours later, the door creaked open. Corporal Diaz stepped out, spotting her silhouette against the cold starlight. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you should come inside, it's warm." "I'm fine," she replied. He lingered, unsure if he should leave. They're telling your story in there." "I know." He hesitated again. "You don't want to correct them." Eva shook her head. "They need their version, the kind with heroes and reasons. Let them keep it." Diaz nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." He turned to go, but she stopped him with a quiet voice. "Corporal." He faced her again. "You did well," she said. "When the comms went down, you didn't run." He blinked, startled. "Thank you, ma'am." Her eyes softened slightly. "Don't thank me. Just remember what fear feels like. It keeps you alive." He nodded once and disappeared into the light of the mess hall, leaving her alone with the night. Later, she returned to the supply depot, the same cavernous hall where she'd sat with the rifle and the coffee. The lights were dim, humming faintly. The air smelled of oil and cold steel. She walked between the aisles, fingers brushing against the stacked crates. Every one of them counted, labeled, accounted for. Everything in its place, everything ordered. The way it should be. She found the crate she'd been sitting on the night Diaz brought her coffee. The cup was still there, long cold now. She picked it up, felt the smooth curve of the metal in her hand, and for a strange moment smiled. She whispered something under her breath in Russian, just a few words, soft and private. It was a prayer, or maybe a memory. Outside, a storm was forming again beyond the mountains. Lightning flickered on the horizon, but no rain came. Eva watched it from the open bay door, the wind tugging gently at her sleeves. Somewhere behind her, a radio crackled to life. A message coming in from command. New coordinates, new requisition orders, new needs. The world never stopped breaking itself. There was always another house to keep in order. She listened for a moment, then shut it off. For once, she allowed herself to just be. No duty, no orders, no ghosts. Just the sound of wind, and the faint hum of machines still working because she'd made them work. When dawn came, she was still awake. The base was quiet again, blanketed in the pale gold of early light. A single osprey lifted off the pad, carrying the last of the wounded away. The rotors churned the air, scattering dust and sunlight in equal measure. Eva watched it go, then turned back toward the depot. The house was clean, the systems worked. The men would live. That was enough. She slung her rifle, adjusted her collar, and walked into the light. The voiceover would fade here into silence, leaving the final lines carried by music and memory. In war, some victories shout. Others whisper. And sometimes the quietest voice is the one that keeps the world standing. They called her weak, they called her plain. But when the house caught fire, she was the one who kept it from falling. Because strength isn't what people see. It's what stays standing when no one's left to notice. They called her a ghost. Not to her face, of course. Soldiers have a way of hiding reverence under nicknames. But the word followed her through the air like smoke. In the mess hall, in the barracks, in the soft-spoken rumors that spread faster than orders. The Kikimora still walks kestrel. Don't let her catch you slacking. She sees everything. Eva Rostova didn't acknowledge it. She simply worked. Audits, inventories, repair reports, the same endless rhythm of war's machinery, grinding forward as if the siege had never happened. But nothing at Kestrel was the same anymore. The men who had once ignored her now stood a little straighter when she passed. The jokes had stopped. The laughter, when it came softer. It wasn't fear, it was understanding. And understanding changes everything. On the 10th morning after the battle, a message came through. Stamped Priority 1. The commanding officer called her in. Thorne stood by the window of his prefab office, sunlight cutting through the dust like the beam of a projector. He turned when she entered. His sling was gone. He looked older. Maybe he always had and she just hadn't noticed before. Orders from command, he said, handing her a sealed packet. They're reassigning you. She took it without looking at the seal. Where to? Undisclosed, he said. You're to report to the forward airstrip by 600 tomorrow. Transport will be waiting. Eva nodded once. Thorne watched her, the kind of watchfulness that came from guilt mixed with gratitude. I asked them to let you stay, he said, but they didn't even answer. That's not how it works, sir. He smiled faintly. No, I suppose it is. There was silence for a moment, a rare, unguarded silence. Then he said, do you ever get tired of being the one who cleans up other people's mistakes? Eva's eyes met his. You don't get tired, she said. You just get quiet. She turned to leave. But before she could step through the door, he said softly, wherever they send you, I hope they listen this time. She paused. The faintest smile touched her scarred face. They never do, Colonel. That's why they send me. She packed light. One rucksack, one rifle case, a folded photograph tucked inside her field manual. That night, the base threw a farewell it didn't call a farewell. No banners, no speeches, just a bottle passed around a campfire and too many words left unsaid. Gallinus came by, limping as always, his shadow stretching long under the floodlights. He didn't salute. He just stood beside her, hands shoved deep into his pockets. I still owe you a beer, he muttered. You already bought it, she said. He frowned. When you listened, she said quietly. That's all I ever wanted. He grunted. You know they're gonna tell stories about you. Half of 'em won't be true. Most stories aren't, she replied. But sometimes the lie carries the right message. He nodded, eyes glinting in the firelight. You really are the house spirit, huh? She looked toward the dark ridges around the base, the same mountains that had nearly swallowed them all. I don't punish, she said softly. I remind. Gallinus didn't understand, not completely, but he nodded anyway. Take care, Sergeant. She gave a short, crisp nod, her version of goodbye. The next morning before sunrise, the airfield shimmered with mist. A single Osprey idled on the tarmac, rotors spinning slow, heavy circles through the fog. She stood beside it, rucksack slung, rifle case in hand. No escort, no fanfare, just another transfer. A mechanic came running across the field with a sealed envelope. Orders say this goes with you, ma'am. Eva took it, slipping it into her jacket. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. To Sergeant Eva Ristova. They asked me for a final report on the incident at Kestrel. I told them the truth, that without your actions we would all be dead. They redacted it, said it was classified. So I'm writing this instead for myself, for my conscience. Men like me learn too late that strength isn't loud. It doesn't swagger or shout orders, or paint the world in bravado. It moves quietly, fixing what others break, holding the line no one sees. I thought command was about leading from the front. You taught me it's about listening from the shadows. Wherever you go next, I hope they know who they're getting. Colonel Marcus Thorne. She folded the letter and tucked it inside the same pocket as the photograph. Then she stepped onto the aircraft. The ramp lifted. The world of Kestrel shrank to a blur of dust and concrete below. From above, the base looked small, a scar on the side of a sleeping mountain. But scars have meaning. They're proof that something once tried to destroy you and failed. Her new posting was north, further into the mountains, where the air grew thin and the sky pressed close enough to touch. The outpost was smaller, quieter. Technically a relay station, but the men there called it Outpost Meridian. It was half forgotten, undermanned, and undersupplied, the kind of place that existed more out of bureaucratic habit than strategic value. Perfect. Eva arrived at dawn. The duty sergeant, a young corporal with sleepless eyes, stared at her credentials and frowned. "Ma'am, we weren't expecting anyone from command." "You weren't," she said. He blinked, uncertain how to respond. "Who's in charge?" she asked. Lieutenant Renner. He's inside." Renner turned out to be barely out of training, thin, overconfident, his uniform too clean for the terrain. He greeted her with a half-smile that she'd seen 100 times before, the same one that said, "I don't know you, but I already know you don't matter." "Quartermaster," he said, reading her patch, "we requested reinforcements, not auditors." "I'm here to evaluate your logistics readiness," Eva said flatly. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Our readiness is fine. Supplies are stable, comms are operational, and morale's high." Eva's eyes flicked to the flickering generator outside the window, the rusted fuel line coiled like a snake, the unattended rifle leaning against a wall. Every detail spoke otherwise. "Then this will be easy," she said. He shrugged. "Whatever helps command sleep at night." She gave a curt nod and turned away, already taking notes on her datapad. Behind her, Renner called, "Don't go poking into things that don't need fixing, Sergeant. This isn't some horror story." Eva paused. Her voice when she spoke was soft, too soft for comfort. "It always starts that way." For the next 3 days, she worked alone, mapping the base, cataloging supplies, observing. She noticed the same patterns, the same cracks in discipline that always appeared before disaster. Ammo stacked too close to fuel. Generators without backup. A comms tower unshielded against interference. And men confident in their routine, blind to their fragility. Every night she filed reports no one would read. Every morning she found new things out of place. Every hour she listened to the hum of the mountain and felt it, the same pressure in the air she'd felt before Kestrel fell. That invisible tension before the break. On the 4th night she couldn't sleep. She stood outside under a sky dusted with stars, the wind thin and sharp. Her shadow stretched long across the dirt. In her hand she held the photograph again, the one from her locker, the man's face faded but still smiling. "Still cleaning up messes," she whispered, a hint of tired humor in her voice. "Still keeping the house." She folded the photo and slipped it back into her pocket. And then she heard it, faint, distant, almost mistaken for thunder. Not thunder. Mortars. Inside, alarms began to wail. Men shouted, boots pounded the dirt. The pattern was the same, always the same. Eva didn't flinch. She lifted her rifle, chambered around, and walked toward the rising glow beyond the ridgeline. Her voiceover would come in here, calm, reflective, deliberate, the tone of someone who had long stopped being surprised by chaos. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. It just moves. It finds the next house with the lights still on. And someone has to keep it from burning. They think I'm a ghost. But I'm not. I'm just what's left when everything else has failed. She reached the outpost's main gate, men scrambling, shouting orders that contradicted each other. She didn't shout. She simply pointed, directed, corrected. Her movements smooth, unhurried, inevitable, as though she'd been here before in another life. Because she had. Over and over. In a dozen broken places, across a dozen forgotten wars. By dawn, the attack was over. Small, local, contained. But the damage was done, a generator hit, a fuel dump burning, one medic gone. Renner found her near the smoldering wreckage. He didn't smirk this time. He looked at her the way Vance had once looked, with that same dawning awareness of what she really was. "You knew," he said quietly. Eva didn't answer. She simply picked up a wrench, tightened a line on the generator, and said, "Now you do." Later, as she walked the perimeter again, the first rays of sunlight touched the outpost. A new day, another scar waiting to form. The world would call it survival. She called it maintenance. In the soft, echoing rhythm of her boots on gravel, her thoughts formed words, words that never left her lips, but lingered in the voiceover narration that would close the part. Every outpost thinks it's safe until it learns otherwise. Every soldier thinks they understand war until they see it break the quiet. Me, I've stopped waiting for peace. I just keep the lights on. Because somewhere someone has to. The camera would fade out on Eva standing alone against the rising sun, a small figure on the edge of a world that never stops breaking. The rifle at rest, the mountain behind her endless. And in that stillness, one final line would whisper through the narrator's voice, low and resolute. They called her weak. They called her plain. But when the storms came again, they called her first. How do you fight a war that no one believes is still happening? Outpost Meridian was quiet again. The kind of quiet that comes after the smoke clears, when men convince themselves the danger has passed because it has to. The attack that hit them had been small, surgical. The enemy withdrew before sunrise, leaving behind little more than wreckage and shaken confidence. But Eva Rostova knew better. She always did. She'd seen this pattern before the probing strikes. The small wounds meant not to kill but to measure. They weren't done, not yet. By the third day, Meridian looked almost functional again. The crater near the generator had been filled. The new comm line snaked up the ridge like a lifeline. The men were working harder now, eyes sharper, jokes quieter. And Lieutenant Renner, the young commander who had once smirked at her, now stood straighter when she entered the room. He still didn't understand her, but he'd stopped underestimating her. "Enemy pulled back east," he said during the morning brief. "Intel says they're regrouping. We'll be fine if we reinforce the outer wall." Eva's eyes drifted over the base map, projected onto the table. "Fine," she asked quietly. "That's a dangerous word, Lieutenant." Renner frowned. "You don't agree?" "Fine means we're comfortable," she said, "and comfort gets people killed." The men at the table exchanged looks. The silence that followed was awkward, but not dismissive, more like the silence of people trying to learn from someone they didn't yet know how to read. Renner nodded stiffly. "Then what do you recommend?" Eva studied the map. "You've repaired the wall, good, but you haven't fixed the problem." He leaned forward. "Which is?" "Complacency," she said. That night the wind returned, cold, dry, restless. Eva walked the perimeter alone, as she always did. The floodlights painted her shadow long and thin across the ground. She paused at each watch post, spoke little, listened much. One sentry, a young private with nervous hands, tried to make small talk. "Ma'am, is it true what they say, that you were at Kestrel?" Eva's voice was calm. "You hear a lot of things." He hesitated. "They say you took out 3 men in the dark iron sights. No scope." She didn't answer. He glanced away, embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am, just guess I wanted to know if the story was true." Eva looked out toward the mountains, where the wind whispered between the rocks. "Does it matter?" she asked softly. The private didn't respond. And that was the end of the conversation. Later, back in her quarters, Eva sat on her bunk with her datapad open. Her fingers traced reports she'd written 100 times before, numbers, supply chains, maintenance logs, the language of order. But tonight she wasn't writing. She was watching. A small screen flickered with live drone feed, thermal imaging over the eastern ridge. The valley beyond was quiet, too quiet. She zoomed in. There, a faint movement, a line of heat signatures barely visible. Men at least 6, maybe more, moving slow, purposeful. Eva's breath caught, not in fear but recognition. They weren't advancing toward the base, they were circling it, mapping. She uploaded a capture, marked the coordinates, and sent it to Renner's secure channel. No response. She sent it again. Still nothing. Finally she rose, slung her rifle and left her quarters. The command post was half-lit, the hum of generators loud against the quiet. Renner sat at his desk, speaking in low tones to a man on a holographic feed. Eva froze at the threshold. The other man's face was blurred by encryption, but his insignia was clear. Intelligence Division. Her stomach tightened. Renner ended the call quickly when he saw her. "Sergeant Rostova, you should knock." "I sent a report," she said. "Hostile movement east of the ridge, no response." He nodded curtly. "I saw it." "And?" "Intel confirms it's nothing. Locals, probably shepherds." Eva stepped closer, voice flat. "Shepherds don't move in formation." Renner sighed, rubbing his temples. "Command doesn't want to escalate. We're on strict observation orders. No engagement." Observation got men killed at Kestrel. His eyes flashed. "This is Kestrel." Her gaze held his. "That's what Thorne said." The silence between them stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Renner looked away. "You've made your report, Sergeant." Dismissed. She stared at him for a long moment, long enough for him to start fidgeting under her gaze, then turned and left. But her mind was already racing. If intelligence had eyes here, this wasn't routine. Meridian wasn't just a forgotten outpost, it was bait. That night, Eva didn't sleep. She sat in the supply hangar, surrounded by crates and the smell of metal and oil. Her hands moved automatically, organizing, cataloging, preparing. Not because she had to, because she always did before something went wrong. The wind rattled the metal siding. A faint vibration hummed through the floor, low, rhythmic, distant. Not wind. Engines. She was moving before she knew it, out the door, across the yard, rifle slung, night vision goggles dropping into place. The hum grew louder. She reached the edge of the ridge and froze. Below, in the darkness, movement. Not 6 men this time, dozens. Vehicles' headlights blacked out, crawling like insects through the valley floor. She keyed her radio. "Command, this is Rostova. Eyes on multiple hostiles." "Static." She switched frequencies. Nothing. The line was dead. She felt it then, a faint electric pulse through the ground beneath her boots. Jammer. They were already inside the perimeter. Back at the base, chaos erupted. The first explosion hit the motor pool, a blinding flash that tore the air apart. Sirens wailed, men scrambled, voices collided. Rifles cracked in the dark. Eva moved fast, slipping through the smoke like she'd done 100 times before. Her calm was unnatural, almost surgical. She wasn't thinking about fear. She was thinking about structure, about collapse and counterbalance. She reached the comms bunker, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in. Renner lay nearby, coughing, blood streaking his temple. He saw her through the dust. "They jammed everything. How did they?" "They knew," Eva said. "They've been watching." She crouched beside him, pulling him to his feet. "Can you walk?" He nodded weakly. "Then listen to me," she said, voice firm. "They'll target the power next. Get your men underground. Keep the wounded in the generator trench." Renner stared at her, dazed. "And you?" She looked toward the eastern ridge, the same direction the attack had come from. "Someone has to make them stop watching." The next few minutes stretched like hours. Eva moved through the burning outpost, her path a blur of motion and smoke. She gathered what she needed, a radio, a sidearm, a single block of C4, and slipped into the storm drain that ran beneath the base. The air inside was cold and wet, filled with the echo of distant explosions. She crawled for what felt like forever, emerging at the far side of the ridge. The valley below was alive with movement, enemy command post, makeshift antenna, jammers humming. They hadn't expected anyone to come to them. That was their mistake. Eva slid down the slope, silent as a shadow, her rifle cradled low. She counted her steps, her breath, her heartbeats. Every second was measured, deliberate. At the base of the hill, she placed the charge, just enough to collapse the rock shelf above their equipment. When it went, the whole valley would fall quiet. She keyed the detonator, glanced once toward the burning outpost, and whispered, "House inspection." The explosion rolled through the mountains like thunder. The enemy comms post vanished in a storm of dirt and fire. Back at Meridian, the jammers died. Radios crackled back to life. Renner's voice cut through the static. "Anyone read? Repeat, this is Meridian Command." Loud and clear came the reply, "Reinforcements inbound." He looked up just in time to see her silhouette emerging from the smoke. Dusty, bloodied, but alive. She walked past him without slowing, straight toward the power grid, resetting switches, rerouting current. Her movements precise, controlled. Renner followed her. "You did that," he said. She didn't respond. "You saved us." Still nothing. He reached out, grabbing her arm. Why do you keep doing this?" Finally she looked at him, not with anger but something older, heavier. "Because someone has to keep the lights on," she said, "even if no one remembers who did it." When dawn came, Meridian was still standing. Barely, but standing. Eva watched from the ridgeline as medevacs landed, lifting away the wounded. The world would move on, it always did. And she would move with it. The narrator's voice would fade in over the sound of rotors, soft and steady, carrying her unspoken thoughts. Some wars don't end. They just change uniforms. People call it courage, but it's not, it's maintenance. You hold the line, you keep the house, you wait for the next storm. And when it comes, you start again. The camera would linger on her face, tired, stoic, scar catching the light before cutting to black. How far back do you have to go to understand why someone stopped speaking? Outpost Meridian was rebuilding again. The smoke was gone, replaced by the constant sound of welding, hammers, and breathing, proof that life, stubborn as ever, refused to stay quiet. But Eva Rostova had grown quieter still. After the last attack, she spent her nights alone by the generator trench, staring into the hum of light as if it whispered answers. No one disturbed her anymore. Not because they feared her, but because they could feel it. That invisible gravity of someone carrying more than just orders. It started one night when a young medic, Corporal Lane, found her sitting on a crate outside the infirmary. The stars were out, the wind was soft. He sat beside her, hesitating. "Ma'am," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" She didn't look at him. "You already did." He smiled shyly. "Right, why do you never talk about before?" Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Before what?" "Before all this," he said. "Before Kestrel, before the army." She didn't answer. He waited a long moment, then rose. "Sorry, I didn't mean." Her voice stopped him. "You wouldn't believe it if I told you." He sat back down. "Try me." She exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. "I used to teach people how to kill," she said. Lane blinked. "You were a sniper instructor." Her jaw tightened. "No, I was the example they learned from." 13 years earlier. Different country, different war. Eva Rostova was part of Task 9, A small unit so secret even the uniforms had no insignia. They were ghosts with names, specialists. Their mission wasn't to fight battles. It was to make sure battles never happened. She was 25. Her husband, Anton, was her spotter. Together they were efficient, precise, and frighteningly quiet. People called them the twins of silence. The mission that ended them was supposed to be simple. Phaedra Pass, clear the convoy, exfil at dawn. But dawn never came. The voiceover would soften here, reflective, slow. It's strange how you remember sound in moments like that. Not the gunfire, but the wind. The way it stopped right before everything went wrong. Eva remembered the radio static. The coded words that told them the pass was secure. The order to move. And the flash that followed, the one that ripped the mountain open. When she woke, the world was smoke and snow and blood. Her team was gone. Anton was gone. Only her heartbeat remained, uneven, animal, desperate. She crawled through the wreckage for hours, calling their names. No one answered. By nightfall, she found the enemy camp, not large, not organized, but alive. She should have retreated. Waited for rescue. She didn't. Instead, she set her rifle. One shot, two, three. Until the camp was silent. The next morning, when recovery teams found her, she was still sitting there, rifle across her knees, eyes hollow, snow melting around her boots. She said nothing. Not to them. Not to anyone. Back at command, they wrote it up as heroism. One woman held the pass, 30 hostiles eliminated, mission complete. They pinned a medal on her chest. She never wore it. What the file didn't say was that she had called in artillery coordinates, and those shells had fallen short. That she had killed some of her own, including Anton. The voiceover returns here, slow, low, filled with pain disguised as calm. They gave me a promotion. And I gave them my silence. Because once you've destroyed the thing you loved most, the noise of metals just sounds like mercy you don't deserve. She transferred to logistics after that. No one questioned it. They were just relieved to move her somewhere. She couldn't break anything else. But she never stopped serving. She simply changed how. If I couldn't save people with a rifle, she said, I'd save them with order, with discipline, with systems that don't fail when humans do. That's why I count things, why I fix things. Because every number I balance means one less death I have to remember. Corporal Lane sat silently beside her as she spoke, the camp lights flickering against her face. He didn't interrupt. Didn't comfort. Just listened. Exactly what she needed. When she finished, she looked at him, not to gauge his reaction, but to make sure he understood the one rule that kept her alive. Never let guilt make your decisions, she said softly, but never let it leave either. It keeps your aim steady. He nodded, eyes glassy. Yes, ma'am. She smiled faintly. Now you know why I don't sleep. Days passed. Meridian slowly repaired itself. But Eva's story, the real one, began to drift through the outpost like a rumor, quieter than before, heavier. Some called it myth, others warning. The older soldiers said she wasn't cursed, just honest in a way the world couldn't stand for long. One night, Renner approached her by the perimeter wall. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for himself. I heard, he said simply. Eva took the cup. Heard what? About Phaedra Pass. She didn't flinch. Then you heard someone talk too much. He hesitated. Was it true? She sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her, parts of it. Renner studied her face, the calm surface of someone who'd made peace with something unforgivable. He shook his head. I don't understand how you keep doing this. Doing what? Serving after that. She looked toward the mountains. The same endless horizon she'd seen in every war since. "Because I'm still breathing," she said. "And if I'm breathing, I can make sure someone else does too." That night the outpost lost power again, brief, unplanned. The men cursed, stumbled in the dark. Eva moved through it like it was daylight. She flipped the switches, checked the breakers, restarted the generator. When the lights came back on, she stood there, alone in the soft glow, her face half-lit, half-shadowed. Her voice would come in over the low hum of the scene, the reflective tone that sits between sorrow and strength. "People think war ends when the shooting stops. But it doesn't. It ends when you stop counting the names. And I can't stop counting. So I stay, I fix, I build. Because somewhere out there, someone, waiting for a house that won't fall." The camera would linger on her hand resting on the generator, the faint tremor of fatigue, the scar across her knuckles catching the light before fading to black. Transition, present-day dawn. Eva stands on the ridge above Meridian. The valley is calm. Her eyes are tired but clear. For the first time, she looks less like a soldier and more like someone learning to live with herself. A radio crackles behind her. "Sergeant Rostova, message from command. You're being recalled." She doesn't turn around. To where? "Capitol Base. General wants you debriefed personally." She closes her eyes for a moment. Then, "Tell them I'll be there by nightfall." The voiceover begins again, slower now, more reflective, the sound of a heart that stopped trying to justify itself. "You can't outrun ghosts. You can only walk beside them long enough to understand why they stayed. And maybe that's the point. Not forgiveness, not glory. Just understanding." She shoulders her pack, takes one last look at the outpost below, and starts walking down the slope. The wind moves through the grass, soft and endless, carrying the sound of machines, men laughing, a house still standing. And as the screen fades, her final thought cuts through the silence. "They called me weak. They called me broken. But weakness isn't the opposite of strength. It's the weight that proves it's real. They said the capital was peaceful. That no war ever reached its glass towers, its perfect streets, its soldiers who never had to reload under fire. But Eva Rostova could still smell it. Even here under the polished marble, beneath the anthem and the medals, the war never left. It just wore cleaner boots." She stepped off the transport plane into a world of order. The airfield was spotless, the uniforms sharp, the flags untouched by wind or dirt. No shouting, no chaos. Just the steady rhythm of a machine, pretending to be human. A young officer approached her, saluting crisply. "Sergeant Rostova," he said, "welcome to Capitol Base. You're expected at Central Command at 900 hours." She nodded once, understood. The officer hesitated, permission to say something off record. "Go ahead." He lowered his voice. "My brother served at Kestrel. He said you saved his life." Eva looked at him, really looked at him. "You should thank the medics," she said. "They're the ones who kept him alive." "I did," he replied, "but he said you kept the lights on." She didn't answer, just walked past him, boots echoing on the tarmac like the tick of a clock running out of time. Her quarters were small, temporary. 4 walls, 1 bed. A city humming beyond the window, so bright it hurt her eyes. She dropped her pack, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the envelope she'd carried since Meridian. Inside the photo, the man in the birch forest. Anton. The edges were frayed now, the image faded from years of handling. But his smile was still there. Untouched, unjudging. "Almost done," she whispered to the picture. "Just one more house." At 8:55, she walked into Central Command. Marble floors, flags hanging in precise symmetry. Rows of soldiers lining the hall, silent, watching her pass. She wasn't sure if they were honoring her or inspecting her? Maybe both. At the end of the corridor, two guards opened the doors to the briefing chamber. Inside, a semicircle of officers waited. And at the center, General Varick. The last time Eva had seen him, he'd been a colonel signing the orders that sent Task 9 to die. 13 years later, his face was older, heavier, but his eyes were still the same. Sharp, calculating, empty. "Sergeant Rostova," he said, "it's been a long time." Eva stood at attention. "Yes, sir." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." She remained standing. Varick sighed. "Always by the book." "Always," she said. He opened a dossier on the table. "You've been busy. Kestrel, Meridian, 2 near-total collapses averted, commendations pending." "I did my job." He nodded. "You did more than that." There was a pause, the kind that tests who will speak first. Eva didn't break it. Varick closed the file and leaned forward. "I've read everything, the reports, the testimonies, even Thorne's letter. I'm sure you redacted the parts that mattered." He smiled faintly. "You always did have a sharp tongue. I learned from watching men who mistake silence for obedience." He studied her for a long time, then said quietly, "You think I don't remember Phaedra Pass? I think you remember the version that makes you sleep at night." His face hardened. "That operation was compromised. We lost good people." "You lost my people," she said, voice low but steady, "because you sent us in with faulty intel and a broken comm relay, and when I called for extraction, you ignored it. That's not how it's written." "I know," she said. "You wrote it." The room fell silent. No one moved. Even the air seemed to stop. Finally, Varick spoke. "You were a soldier, Rostova. You followed orders." She met his eyes. "I followed logic, you followed protocol." He frowned. "You think that makes you right?" "No," she said. "It makes me responsible." He leaned back, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "And what do you want, Sergeant? Recognition? Redemption?" "I want you to stop pretending we're different," she said. "You send men to die from behind this desk. I hold them when they do. That's the only difference." The other officers shifted uneasily. No one dared interrupt. Varick's voice dropped lower. "You're out of line." "I've been out of line since Phaedra," she said. "You just finally noticed." He exhaled, tapping the dossier with a single finger. "You know, I could bury you with this file." She nodded. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Eva looked down at her hands, scarred, steady. "Because I have nothing left to lose but truth." Varick stared at her for a long moment, then closed the folder and stood. He walked around the table, stopping a few feet from her. "You know," he said quietly, "most soldiers would have broken a long time ago." She looked at him. "I did. I just learned how to stand while broken." He said nothing. Then something unexpected. He straightened, took one slow breath, and raised his hand to his temple. A salute. The room froze. Officers exchanged shocked glances. No one moved. No one spoke. Eva blinked, unsure at first if she was imagining it. Then she realized he wasn't saluting a subordinate. He was saluting a survivor. Her throat tightened. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Not pride, not vindication. Something quieter. Something human. Slowly she returned the salute. When she lowered her hand, Varick said softly, "You were right about everything. We failed you." Her voice was even. "You failed yourselves." He nodded once, eyes heavy. "You should have been an officer." "I was never meant to give orders," she said, "just to make sure they didn't kill us." Outside, the morning sun broke through the city haze. Eva walked alone down the steps of Central Command, the echoes of the salute still lingering behind her. Reporters were waiting by the gate, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. "Sergeant Rostova, Is it true you defied command orders at Meridian? Are you being promoted? What do you have to say to the general's salute? She paused, eyes distant, calm. And then she said the only thing she could. Sometimes the loudest victory is silence. Then she walked away. The scene would soften, her walking through the capital streets, passing civilians who didn't know her name, soldiers who didn't recognize her face. A world healed by people who'd never see the scars that healed it. She stopped at a small cafe, bought a single cup of black coffee, sat by the window. The rain began to fall outside, light, hesitant, almost kind. She took a sip, closed her eyes. In the reflection of the window, she saw Anton's smile in her memory, young, bright, unbroken. "We did it," she whispered. "We kept the house standing." The voiceover would return here, gentle, low, filled with both peace and ache. They'll tell stories about the battle, about the bases, the explosions, the orders. But not about the quiet. Not about the woman who counted every bullet, every breath, every name. They'll say she was cold, they'll say she was strange. But they'll never understand. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was trying to keep the world from breaking again. The camera would fade between moments, soldiers rebuilding Meridian, Thorne's letter framed on a desk, a young recruit repeating her words during training. Never let guilt make your decisions, but never let it leave either. And then back to Eva. Older now, alone, peaceful. Sitting under a gray sky, eyes closed, the faint hum of distant engines in the background. Strength isn't loud. It doesn't ask for witnesses. It just endures. And sometimes, when it's done everything it can, the world finally salutes it back. The final shot. Eva stands, places her empty coffee cup on the railing, and walks toward the fading light of the horizon. The rain glints off her jacket, each drop catching the sun like a medal no one will ever pin. The narrator's last line soft, fading like a prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.